Who says tech can't be human?
Welcome back to the show.
Glad to be back again.
We were all virtual for so long. Now it's time to get back in person. Hacker Valley on the Road is a curated collection of conversations that we've had during conferences and events around the globe.
In this collection, we'll be sharing the most surprising moments from each conference that might change your work in cybersecurity. Welcome back, everyone, to Hacker Valley on the Road. This show is all about sharing experiences from conferences, experience from events all around the world. And I mean all around the world because we traveled all the way down under to Australia. The flight was 16 hours from San Francisco to Sydney, and it was the longest flight I have ever been on. And before getting on the flight, I was a little bit nervous. Not nervous because of the flight itself, but nervous because our plans had changed drastically. The day before the trip, right before we were going to leave, my brother, Cochran, he had to pull out of the trip because of a family emergency. This was a shock to both of us. Being the dynamic duo that we are, we're family, and we know that family comes first. And we also know that we are flexible to perform solo. We had a few objectives that we wanted to hit. The first thing was present at ASA Cyber Conference in Melbourne. We had to also moderate a lunch and learn for Axonius and also some Axonius customers, and do 2 days of podcasting. Not too challenging or new for Hacker Valley, right, and Axonius. The ultimate goal was to come back with video content on all of it. So we had to be many places all at once. I didn't realize that going on this trip was about to change everything for me. Going on this trip alone was a growth opportunity, and it was also an opportunity to get new perspectives. And I have to say, after putting all of this together and going to Australia, my perspective on cybersecurity has changed forever. The morning after I landed, Axonius hosted a lunch and learn in Sydney. In attendance were CISOs, directors, and even a few CEOs. And I moderated a discussion on visibility in cybersecurity. Anyone that works in the cybersecurity industry knows that this topic is the Achilles heel for IT and security. What I always hear is you can't protect what you can't see. And it's the truth. There is really no secret there. The real mystery lies in how we approach this riddle of a statement that we can't protect what we can't see. It's not trivial to just flip a toggle and enable visibility, monitoring, and response for all of your technology solutions and assets. As a technologist, my default answer for any problem is more technology. I think that's a common thread for many of us, especially in the United States, the tinkerers out there. And what really goes through our mind a lot of times is find a vendor, find a Python or JavaScript library, find something that we can connect to via APIs to help make this visibility problem go away. As the moderator, my main job was to listen. And what I heard was each attendee explaining that their approach to tackling visibility was through building teams that understand their technology stack and also build their teams to be engaged with the needs of the business. Think about that. Helping your security team get more acquainted with the needs of the business. when talking to the group, what I learned is what this really means is learning more about the business units that enable the customer or the workforce of the business, developing relationships with the stakeholders for your team and also other teams, and also understanding the processes of teams and learning when and how to give feedback and also submit requests. What was magical listening to this conversation was that everyone was echoing the same sentiment of bettering their team through focusing on the business, focusing on the people and processes before getting so consumed in the technology. I'll be honest, at this moment, I was teleported back to my past, and I was a security architect that was always jumping into proof of concepts with vendors before really understanding all the requirements of my executives and other teams at the organization. On one hand, we have people and processes, but there's still that technology facet. And the technology in your organization is really going to help keep the company effective and productive. There was one question that was asked a number of times, and that was, how do I discover the unknown assets? This is almost a riddle. The common thread and common answer there was, if there's a situation where you wouldn't have an asset in your asset inventory, what other questions can you ask? What technology out there, whether it's security, IT, or owned by another business unit, what enables the organization to be impactful? For many of us, it could be something like Slack or Zoom or another application that everyone at our organization uses. And if that application is company hosted or a SaaS application, then you might have some opportunity to pull out more context from those non-IT and security owned tools and solutions. Visibility is a puzzle, and depending on the times and depending on your situation, you might end up with new puzzle pieces or an entirely new puzzle. That's what makes cybersecurity an art. Visibility always rewards big in cybersecurity. It allows us to turn data into a story, and that story is what we call intelligence. And we use the intelligence to ask better questions throughout our security environment and build a more robust security program. The main objective for the trip to Australia was to present at ASA Cyber Conference our talk titled Cover Your SaaS, Managing Misconfigurations, Shadow Users, and Excessive Spending. After moderating the lunch and learn, I got on a flight from Sydney to Melbourne. And while heading to the conference, I was on the flight wondering, will my talk resonate with the Australian audience? I started to wonder this because the day before at the lunch and learn, we were talking so much about the people and processes and the needs of the business and not too much on the technology. When flying up in the air, I didn't ask for a sign or a realization, but something jumped into me. It was that my talk is titled Cover Your SaaS. And in security, that's what we're always trying to do. We're trying to cover ourselves. We're trying to protect our business. We're trying to protect our data. So I told myself to start with the end in mind. What does a SaaS inventory help with? What does finding SaaS misconfigurations really mean for the business and their bottom line? And how to get to this state to where your stakeholders, the technology, and the people are all working together harmoniously. Earlier in the year, Cloud Security Alliance, they reported that up to 63% of security incidents happen because of SaaS misconfigurations. If we focus on the fundamentals, just imagine what you can do. If you were to reduce half of your security incidents, that would be quite special, right? Does anybody feel that way? Would you feel a sigh of relief? Phew, all right, half of the work is now done. And that's what we're gonna focus on today. We're gonna have a roadmap of how do we get to reducing that 63%. The first question I have for everybody is, if you were to go to your laptop right now, could you get a list of all of your SaaS applications within 1 hour? How many people feel confident that they can get a list of their SaaS applications with 1 hour?
Within 1 hour.
Within 1 hour.
I'll survey.
A lot of people will say, all right, perfect. I'll go to Zoom, I'll go to Okta, I'll log in, and I'll see all the applications. But are you certain that those are all of the SaaS applications that your organization uses? Throughout the talk, I asked the audience a lot of questions to get a gauge on where the attendees were at in their journey of SaaS and also SaaS inventory. And I shared a lot about what I learned at Axonius, how Axonius helps organizations around the world address this problem. It wasn't just the audience I was asking questions to, though. I also hosted a few podcasts when I was in Australia with a few leaders in the space that you might know. If you know me, you would know that it's not a real trip unless there's podcasting. In this stream, I'll share multiple clips from 2 amazing podcast episodes that were recorded during this trip. Let's start with the dynamic duo that are pioneering and trailblazing cybersecurity video content in Australia, Ashish Rajan and Shilpi Bhattacharjee. We started by talking about our talks. Ashish and Shilpi both presented a talk on supply chain risk and also zero trust mindsets and methodologies. A common theme in every conversation this trip was visibility, because it helps you answer the question of what assets affect your supply chain in a negative or positive way, and also which access conditions could you even use to verify the identity of an asset that's accessing one of your trusted resources. This is kind of the approach of zero trust to verify everything. Ashish shared the hardest part of cybersecurity visibility: asset management.
Knowing what you have is probably the foundational piece. I think it's funny, and I remember talking to Nathan from Axonius as well, and this is before Axonius was what it is today, and we still were talking about this very basic thing that asset management is one of the hardest thing you can ever think of.
Right.
As simple as it is.
That?
I know, as simple as it is, like, I mean, I just want to know what I have. And as simple as I said this, it is not as simple as finding that information. I definitely found that most of the conversation that I would have is people feel they have an idea. So there is an angle of, I think I know what I have, and there is like what I really have. Like there are 2 buckets. And it's almost like you're always trying to feel confident that this bucket is what the only thing. There's nothing in this bucket. But the reality is there's always something growing in here. We spoke about the shadow IT thing earlier for SaaS.
Right.
That's also happening. I have no idea if someone decides to, like we used to have this thing called, there's another popular Australian cybersecurity person called Troy Hunt. He has a website called haveibeenpawned.com.
Mm-hmm.
So you can get now subscriptions to find out if your entire domain was ever in a breach list. And in a few of my previous companies, we used to do that as one other thing for employees, because what we found in my first company was that people had their work email used for public services, like for Canva. Oh, I'm just going to use sneak.io or whatever. And suddenly you're like, shouldn't be using company ID for that. I understand you're using it for company stuff, but if you want it, let's go through procurement, let's do the whole proper channel, do a single sign-on. But how many people hand on their heart can say this, that they would not have like small pockets of that in the company? It would be really like it's like you're searching the internet for finding where have all your employees, and the more the number of employees, the bigger the probability that they have not created on something popular. And by the way, they left as well. So what happens then? Like, so we had a lot of scenarios where someone who had used our domain was part of the breach. We get an email from Have I Been Pawned and going, oh, by the way, this domain was there in this particular breach that was announced. You should look into it. And 9 out of 10 times we'll find it was the person who left as well. So you're almost like, well, I hope they didn't have much data, but I don't know what the data was transferred over. So if I were to kind of go back to the first principle of what we do as cybersecurity professionals, one of the biggest asset that we are all trying to protect is data. You can't protect what you can't see. That's the foundational piece, unfortunately.
Facts. Where do you start? Do you start by focusing on your inventory? Do you start by focusing on your supply chain and your like really business operations as a whole, like understanding and where security and ownership fits in? Or do you just try to apply the security strategy? In my opinion, I would say maybe the zero trust strategy you could start with, but that means everybody has to be on board with it.
Yeah.
I think maybe if you go about it, and I heard this over and over again while at the conference, at the Lunch and Learn that I hosted, that it's all about the business requirements, especially in Australia. We don't tinker around as much as other countries. Like, you're not just looking at vendors to look at vendors, but you're looking at vendors to marry the capabilities with business outcomes.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of conversation around a lot of CISOs. Being a former CISO, I can say this, that a lot of conversations won't even happen if there's no business requirement for it. So the reason why someone would come to a lunch and learn or a table is more than just the free food and the conversation. It's more to the fact that I genuinely have a need and I am looking at vendors in that space. That's why I'm here. Otherwise, at any given point in time, CISOs would have a lot more things to look at. I definitely feel it definitely is a business requirement driven model. And not saying that America or Europe doesn't have it. They do have it, but you see pockets of it. You don't see at a mass level where everyone's doing it. So maybe that's kind of where the difference comes in. I definitely found that as well.
Visibility, supply chain, zero trust. These are all hot topics right now in the space, but sometimes it feels like buzzwords without any substance. I asked Ashish and Shilpi what's been their perspective on these big topics in their work, and also what have they heard at the conference. Two of the pillars of zero trust are, being followed, but when it comes to assume breach, I haven't really seen many exercises that are going on assuming that there's a breach before the breach happens.
Well, it's only happening in the security teams. I just say that. So security teams are the only ones, let's assume breach, always. Right. So it works really well. I think, and this is maybe the shortcoming of our security field per se, and I've been a huge promoter of this conversation where, look at how Apple iPhone, I'm sure Android has the same thing as well, but me being an Apple user, they introduced the passcode first, single digit alphanumeric, then they went on to fingerprint, then they went on to Face ID. People, there was a gradual uplifting of security, if you kind of look at from a cybersecurity perspective. And now as a user of Apple, it made my experience super seamless. I don't remember passcode or whatever. I just swipe my phone and it just logs me in. Now, if it doesn't log me in, I'm thinking, oh, something's wrong with my face. I don't know what I do. I don't know, I'm wearing glasses or am I wearing a mask? So that is how security should be. Unfortunately, anything security that we do in an enterprise space right now, nothing is like that. And I think that's where, to your point about assume breach is there. People have the idea, but it's only in security. Because for everyone else, it's a friction. It's not a seamless way for me to, I've logged in, I've done my job, I've verified everything. I didn't even realize time has passed. So that's kind of where I think the shortcoming is for, it's going to be in the security team for as long as we don't make it seamless for everyone else to adopt it. Mm-hmm. Assume breach is always going to be only in security.
Kind of makes me think about, I got a really interesting question yesterday at my talk. So someone asked me, with the supply chain, where does the legal side of things sit? And that was to me, and I actually come from a legal background. So it was funny because I said, look, I can give you the lawyer's answer, which is whoever has the best evidence in the courtroom, really. And that's the short answer, because at the end of the day, whoever has done the best paperwork and kind of show that they've done the best due diligence is going to be the one who's going to be able to protect themselves. So I think there's that legal angle as well, which is seeping into, all of this zero trust, asset management, if does that help you actually, keep the good records, and you can kind of say, look, from my end, I've ticked all the boxes. It's, my third party provider or whoever else. So I thought that was I haven't had a legal question asked before, but people are thinking about it, because at the end of the day, cybersecurity is a business and a legal problem.
I could talk to Shilpi and Ashish all day. They're such good friends, and they speak about many topics to many leaders in our space, cybersecurity. They host the Cloud Security Podcast. They're also some of the kindest hosts of a new land that you'll ever experience. They were gracious hosts to us when we came to Australia. After recording the episode, they went out and they got us some tarts. They learned that we only tried tarts inside the United States, so they wanted to change that for us. If you don't already follow their show, check them out on your favorite streaming platform. Also, not to worry, each of the podcasts in their entirety that we show on this stream can be found on Axonius Plus. Throughout my career, I've worked as a consultant, I've worked as a vendor, I've worked as a practitioner focusing on securing the enterprise. And what I've learned is some people have the gift of being all three at the same time. Adam Green and Dirk Hodgson from NTT are another dynamic duo in Australia that I had the luxury of speaking to. They help companies from many different angles. I thought it would be excellent to draw from their experience as executives and as leaders in the space to see how the Australian cybersecurity market differs from the rest of the world.
I always have my 3 golden rules, and the 3 golden rules are, first of all, you don't disconnect from the internet, because if it's a particularly malicious attack, you've got to be mindful of anything that's placed in what we call a red button, or the potential for an absolute obliteration of all of your hardware, so of the drives. So we say don't disconnect if you can avoid it. And then from that you start to consider, well, that device has already been hit, so let's use that to learn what we can. So then golden rule number 2, isolate what's been owned and let that be your forensic tool. Let you start to learn from that. And rule number 3 is, if you can avoid it, you don't pay the ransomware. So, but if we look at those 20 attacks, so one thing that was common was rule number 1 generally got broken. In a lot of cases, they ran along and they pulled out the cord and disconnected the internet. Rule number 2 about isolating what was already owned, generally we didn't see that done very well. And rule number 3 about paying the ransom, in most cases there was anecdotally some ransom paid or negotiated. But what we see across all of those attacks is, in every case, they had the right technology in place. I mean, look, it's 2022. We've all acquired a lot of cybersecurity technology. But what wasn't done well, and why those attacks actually occurred, is because they hadn't done the basic things right, the basic hygiene things right. So they hadn't patched to the latest version of endpoint protection that they had. But if they had have done that, that endpoint protection would have been good enough to pick up what was coming in from the start. In every case, they had something for email filtering, but it was in passive mode. So if they had have applied that compensating control the way that it was intended, probably wouldn't have happened. In every case, they had state-of-the-art, next-generation firewalls, but they hadn't reviewed the latest rule sets, which is something that we advocate quite heavily when we speak with our clients, is do regular rule reviews on your firewalls, because if that's your last line of defense or your first line of defense, depending on how you look at it, you want to make sure that you're up to date with how fast your business is moving, not, let's review it every 3 years, or even better, copy and paste the rules when we change from vendor A to vendor B. So then we see that they didn't apply the same compensating controls that they know they should be applying.
There's nothing like having the option to be back in person. On the last edition of Hacker Valley on the Road, I mentioned my favorite part about any in-person conference is LobbyCon. And I was thrilled and delighted that this isn't just a thing in the United States, or it's not just a thing in cybersecurity, but the rest of the world has the same concept. And I'm not alone in this being one of my favorite parts of the conference.
I reckon that the most important part of these conferences are those little hallway chats, and really the connections that you would just never otherwise make. But I am going to pick up on something you said there, Ron, about the keynote speeches as well. A lot of the time in our industry, we tend to get very task focused, right? There's a particular cyber problem at hand that we need to solve. So all of our conversations end up being about that problem at hand. What I think these conferences are so good at is giving people a chance to just get outside of their daily box a little bit, and perhaps turn up to a talk that they wouldn't have ever otherwise thought to research or attend or listen to. And, maybe they learn something or make a connection in their mind that helps us to grow that cyber body of knowledge.
Yep. Let us know what conference you're going to next. Drop it in the chat. We'll keep it on our radar because we would love to meet each and every one of you. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you so much for spending some time out of your day today. It's our passion and our mission to share more experiences from events and conferences all around the world. Watch them now by visiting axonius.com/plus. Until then, we will get back on the road and see you next time.